I am so excited to have one of my mentors, one of my big sisters on the podcast, Nancy Motley. Let me tell you how much I love Nancy. When people say, Tan, what books do you recommend for multilingual students? I always say first the SciOp book. And I say, if it's too much, go look at Nancy's book, Talk, Read, Talk, Write. It's the book that it works from K to 12. It's the practical application of SciOp. And so I am so always excited and honored to have one of the greatest influences in my career. Nancy, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you, Ton. That was a huge introduction and very touching. Thank you. I've never been told that I'm the implementation of PSYOP in one book, but I appreciate that sentiment because I think you're right. We all want to do better, but it's got to be easy, right? We have to have a way to do it. So
I mean, just the title, like Talk, We Talk, Right? Like in that title itself, it's like, oh, wait, I get it. There's chunking, there's intentional co-planning, there's practice and review, there's strategies and application. It's like, it's PSYOP in a model that works. It's like almost like PSYOP for teachers who are too busy.
yeah, right. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Or what are all of, and not to imply this, but all of those books blank for dummies, right? Like
Yes,
electricity for dummies or whatever,
yes,
right?
yes.
So anyway, thank you very much. And I'm super excited to be with you today too.
Well, it's an honor. Let's start with talking about. Can you share a story that from your teaching practice that has informed your practice today?
Yes. So the story that I want to share with you is really connected to what we're here to talk about today. But I, so in like probably 3 years into teaching, I was on a team of amazing teachers and we were doing PLCs long before PLCs were cool. You know what I mean? Like we would meet multiple times a week and plan together. And we really just had a think tank is the way I always looked at it. And in those meetings, I was kind of seen as a leader. My kids had pretty good test scores. I was kind of willing to try anything out. And week after week, we use data to inform our discussions, right? So we would look at assignments from the week before, things like that. And the competitive side of me started to get in the way because one of my co-teachers, Miss Mayo, her kids' scores were always better than my kids' scores. And it bothered me. It was very annoying. I wanted to be the best. So I decided, well, I'm going to figure out what she does differently than what I do because we have the same lesson plans. We created them together. And when I asked her about it, Miss Mayo was like sweet and kind of mild. And she'd said, I don't know, Nancy, I do the same thing that you do. And I thought, okay, well, I got to go a different route. So in the meetings, I decided I'm just going to listen to everything she says. And I have a bad habit of listening so that I can talk next, which is not really listening. Yes. So anyway, I said, I'm really going to listen. And I noticed that all of us would say something like this, they really miss the questions about main idea, right? Or they're not really understanding context clues. But Miss Mayo's comments were different. She would say something like, did you guys notice on number 7, most of the kids picked B, which was a main idea, but it was the main idea of a paragraph. And they were asking about the whole passage. So her feedback was really kind of item analysis driven. And I thought, oh my gosh, I know what she's really getting in the weeds down and dirty about what needs to be fixed. And that's when I had kind of an epiphany moment, which was my bad secret is that I hate grading papers. And I was winging it. I would go to those meetings acting like I had graded the papers that they're talking about, and I hadn't even graded them yet. I would just go, oh, I know, main idea was a struggle. And I would just lean into whatever they said because I had a stack a mile long behind me in my turn-in tray, right? And so I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to fix this problem. Her kids are better because she's grading her papers. And I know this is a huge weakness of mine. So I had a lofty goal. I'm going to start grading all the papers before I leave at the end of every day. And I bet you can guess how long that lasted. Ton, can you guess how long that lasted?
One day.
Yeah, it didn't happen. Not even on the day that I had the high motivation to do it, right? So what I did was I decided I was going to play a little mind trick on myself. One thing that I do have is a tidy desk, and I clean it every day before I go. So what I did was I took my kids' turn-in tray where they turn in all the work, the stacks, right? And I put it on my desk. Kids do not turn in work in a nice way. It's messy, right? So the visual of this messy turn-in tray on my desk all day long was there. I was always going over there and tidying it, right? And at the end of the day, I was tidying it. So what I did was I created a disruption in my brain, which was this messy tray on my desk. And it forced me to like zone in on grading papers. So that was move number one. Move number two was, Nancy, you don't have to grade all the papers. You only have to grade 3. You have to grade Alex's, Serena's, and Michael's. That's it. And the reason I picked those 3 kids is they were the term where I've always taught was called a bubble kid, right? The kids that barely pass or barely fail, the ones who struggle, right? And I figured I can get away with just those 3. That'll give me information that I need. I don't really need to grade the rest in a timely way. Well, those 2 small changes, grading 3 papers every night before, or every day before I left, and straightening up the turn-in tray, turned into, over time, small habits that really transformed my teaching. Because what happened is, after I graded those 3, I had awesome information about how to reteach the next day, just from those 3 papers, right? And then what happened is, after 2 or 3 weeks of just grading those 3, you know what? I'm already settled down. I've already graded 3. I wonder how Johnny did on this. So I'd get curious about other kids. And over time, what that turned into is I was grading the whole class's papers every day. I was doing this big lofty thing, but not with, because I put that pressure on myself. And then what happened is, over time, I was not only grading, when I'm handing work out the next day, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how they're going to do on number 8. I wonder if they're going to get tripped up on number 6. I hope Johnny remembers what I said in the warm-up, because that's going to be assessed on number 2, right? So it just was this very big snowball effect. But me becoming a very data-informed teacher who was making adjustments day to day really didn't start with me saying, I'm going to be an awesome grader of papers. You know, it started with the messy turn-in tray that was on my desk. So I like to share that story, because I think all of us are capable in the world we live in, which is overwhelmed, and I can't take one more thing. And oh my gosh, just feeling like I'm drowning a little bit. Even in that space, we're all highly capable of affecting massive change with just a teeny tiny move.
Oh my goodness. Every time I talk to you, I feel like you and I are just in the teacher lounge and just talking about our class. Like, you are a teacher at heart, and you're not, I feel like you're the head consultant at Sightlets, right? You're the head trainer at Sightlets.
I'm one of them.
Well, when I talk to you, I feel like you're just a colleague down the hall from me, and be like, I can see myself running to you, be like, Nancy, I don't know what to do with this. And you'd be like, honey, listen, let me show you how to do this part. Because you're so practical. And the second thing I want to say is, like, there's not a teacher out there that likes grading. So you're not alone. It's really hard, but I love the way you change your frame about it. It's like, hey, I'm not really grading, I'm getting formative data. And from that formative data, I can change my instruction next. I also wrote down the title, Atomic Habits. It's a book. It's about a psychologist from Stanford. He talks about, like, don't try to set habits. Don't try to create habits. Don't try to will yourself into doing something new, changing a habit. All you have to do is do something small. And he basically said, if you have a hard time flossing, just say, I'm going to floss 1 tooth. And when you floss 1 tooth, you're like, well, I'm already flossing 1. I might as well floss all of them. And so that's very similar to what you're talking about. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. So the floss 1 tooth comes from BJ Fogg. He wrote a book called Tiny Habits, right? And he's amazing, and his work definitely informed this new resource. And then you were also referring to James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, which, you guys, if you haven't read it, you have to read it. One of the nuggets of wisdom from his book that landed in my book is called the 2-minute rule, right? Whatever you're going to try to do, you got to start with 2 minutes of it. And he shares this great story about this guy who lost massive amounts of weight. But the way he started was he went to the gym for only 5 minutes a day, and he set a timer, and he had to leave, which sounds counterintuitive, right? Like, he's not going to accomplish any weight loss goals with 5 minutes of exercise. But Clear talks about that first 6 weeks of just going for 5 minutes, all that was about was creating the habit of showing up, right? That's all he had to do. And once he learned how to show up, then we can habit stack. We can put something else on top of it and move forward. So I just appreciate both of those mentions that you just gave, because they are very formative to my thinking about what I put in this book about teacher habits.
So let's talk about the title then, the teacher habits. Why small moves?
They're the only things that work when we're overwhelmed and exhausted and tired and don't have any willpower left in it, right, in us, right? So just this idea of small moves, I think is, I don't know, maybe it's dramatic to say it's the only way forward, but it is. I mean, the thinking for how this resource started and how this kind of my next wave of support for teachers was, I'm doing all these trainings. I mean, you've done this, Ton. You go to an amazing 6-hour all day training, or you go to a conference and you leave like, I am Superman. I'm going to change the world starting tomorrow. This stuff is amazing. And then if you revisit yourself a year later, you might have implemented 1 or 2 of those things, but never all of it. And in my experience, when I train teachers, they leave, they drink the Kool-Aid, they're all excited. And then 6 weeks later, I get to go do an observation and a job embedded coaching cycle with that teacher. And I find that what I'm talking to them about is a lot of the same things that I talked about in the training, except now it's in context. Right. So you remember in the training when we talked about speaking in complete sentences? Well, just yesterday, when Johnny asked you the question and you said yes, and then you asked the follow-up, remember his answer was some. And that's the opportunity to coach for the complete sentence. And it sounds like this. And I decided then I've got to write down thises. I've got to write down these little tiny things that I find myself saying with teachers over and over again. And then the flip side of that, you also is so much of my validation for teachers is related to the small moves they're making, right? Teachers are doing amazing things in classrooms, but they're not big and flashy, right? There's one teacher that I have that she is a master at the well-timed physical contact. And what I mean by that is when kids are working and she's actively monitoring, she says very little actually, but the well-timed touch on the shoulder, right? Or when the kid is furiously erasing something and you can tell they're getting frustrated, she'll just move his little hand, grab the eraser, erase it cleanly for them, put it back in his hand with a smile, right? I mean, that's a small move, but oh my gosh, what impact does that have? Right. So I feel like I'm rambling, but.
No, you need to know that you're motivating me. All I can think about is like, after 2 years of COVID, almost 3 years of COVID, teachers need to know, like all the teacher bashing that's happening, they just need to know that there are people that appreciate them and that are validating what they do. And that's what I wrote down the words about, like validating. Like your book is validating all the small moves that they're doing. Let's talk about chapter 1. How do you turn small moves into habits? Can we talk about more about that message of this chapter?
Sure. So what I begin with is really, I would encourage everybody to think about this question, which we never slow down enough to do it. What kind of teacher do you want to be? Right? Like if you were going to, I mean, I guess you could call it a self-mission statement or something like that. But like when somebody talks about you and says, oh my gosh, Ton is blank. What do you want them to say? What kind of teacher do you want to be? And I'll give you an example. For me, a big thing for me is to be intentional, right? So I want to be the kind of teacher that is very intentional in all the decisions that I make. I don't want to just do it to do it. I want to do it anything for a reason. So once we decide that, and this goes back to James Clear's Atomic Habits. He says, all you have to do at that point, once you know what kind of teacher you want to be, you just make small moves that are a vote for that kind of teacher, right? It's like you're casting a vote for yourself, right? And so when I think about a small move in the context of the classroom, right? This idea of habit formation or small things turning into automated skills, I really have 5 criteria for the small moves. One is it has to benefit all learners. You and I both live in the multilingual learner space, right? But in my teaching career, I've also worked with every other kind of kid, right? So we're talking about kids who might come from poverty, kids who lack motivation, kids who might need special accommodation, kids who are super high achieving, right? They keep you on your toes. So the move has to benefit everybody. It also has to apply to all content areas. You know me from Talk Read, Talk Write. I'm not going to be pigeonholed, right? So it's got to be accessible for everybody. And then the other 3 criteria for the small move is once we know it applies to all grades and all contents is It has to be low to no prep. It has to be actionable, something I can try out immediately, and it has to be brief. Like the working title of this book used to be 60-second solutions. So everything in the book is going to be boiled down to 0 instructional time or 1 to 2 minutes at the most in order to implement this in the classroom. Oh, and so basically chapter 1 is, so those are that's kind of how I define a small move. And what we do in chapter 1 is I survey all the research about habit formation, like the losing weight books or those things. And we talk about what does that look like for teachers? So every resource I've ever read about how to turn a small thing into a habit, like to automate it where you don't have to think about it anymore. The number one thing is accountability. So some examples of how teachers can hold themselves accountable, because here's the thing, we're islands unto ourselves. Most of us teach in a classroom with our kids and nobody ever sees us unless they come in to evaluate us. How stressful is that, right? So when we think about if I'm going to work on, let's say I'm going to work on giving my kids a purpose for reading before they read. That's one of my small moves, just setting a purpose. I want to work on that. Well, how can I hold myself accountable for doing that? One way, this is my favorite way actually, is to let your kids in on the secret. Let them help you, right? Kids of all ages, you say, guys, you know what? Every time we read, if we open up our book, if I hand out a piece of paper, if whatever, anytime we're going to be reading something, I want you to help me before we ever read. I want you to say, Miss Motley, what's our purpose, right? So that I can remember to say, our purpose for reading this paragraph is blank. And you will be blown away at how much your kids help you. So that's one way to hold them accountable. Another one that I love is enlist the help of a colleague, even if you don't see them all day long, right? So I just say, Ton, I'm really working on setting a purpose. I know you teach math and you probably don't even think about reading that much, but listen, whenever we get to the water cooler in the teacher's lounge, just say, how's that thing going? Even if you don't remember what my goal is, right? And that's another way that I can start putting what I want to achieve, what that small move is, that vote for myself to be the kind of teacher I want to be. How can I keep it in front of me all the time, right? So those are just a few ideas. There's a lot more in that chapter about how to turn something I want to do into a habit, something that's hard not to do.
This is such an inspirational podcast. This is like a self-help book, but more like an inspirational book for teachers. You said, who do you want to become as a teacher? And through your actions, vote through your actions. Right? And you're helping us do that. That's just so inspirational. Actually, I looked at your book and I don't have an advanced copy, but the table of contents has all these strategies. So when teachers read this book, it's not a thick book. Like all of Silat's books are really, really short. They're actionable, they're practical. And when you look at the book, the table of contents, there's like a few strategies. A few pages, done, next, right? And so you just make it, this really is for the teacher on the go who's really busy.
Yes, absolutely. I would. And here's the other thing that I'm just getting started with training this material. I already can tell you, I'd be willing to bet I'm going to have a whole nother edition within a year. You know why? Because the 23 small moves I included, they're not anywhere close to an exhaustive list, right? This is going to be a place where every time I train it, teachers are going to say, oh my gosh, I like that. And here's something else that I do, right? And I'm going to get to put that in. I'm going to get to cultivate that so that all of us can grow our thinking about what is a tiny step I can make in the classroom that's going to move my kids forward, which is what the rest of the book is about, is thinking about, so what kind of teacher do I want to be? I want to be the kind of teacher where kids talk a lot in my class. And I want to be the kind of teacher where kids think in my class. And I want to be the kind of teacher where kids really, the last phrase I use is achieve more. But what I mean by that is just they get the content, they leave knowing the stuff I'm supposed to be teaching them. And so all the moves are, how do I turn into that kind of teacher?
So let's move to the next chapter where we get a little bit more specific. Can you talk about the teacher habits that get students to talk, which you just talked about? I want to be a teacher that gets students talking.
I think this idea of student to student conversation in the classroom is well landed, right? I mean, teachers know that collaboration is important, and every teacher I've ever met is trying to do this, and there's just pitfalls with it, right? We have students that might not have enough English right now to be able to participate fully. We have some students that have all the English in the world, they just don't like who they're sitting with, right? Or we might have kids who are just kind of lacking engagement or whatever. And so one of the small moves that's my all-time favorite is when we're having kids collaborate, like in a small group, a group of 3 or 4 or whatever, before we're going to call on anybody to share out, I'm going to let them know, hey, you guys, I am probably going to be randomizing. You know how I do that. I'm going to pull my popsicle sticks. But before I do that, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to prepare. And I pull a stick and it's number 3. So all the number 3s at the table, you guys are going to be talking, but you have 30 seconds. So 1s, 2s, and 4s, you lean in and you help number 3 make sure they feel confident. So that strategy is called prep the speaker. And what I love about this one is number 1, we have increased processing time, right? Number 2, number 3 gets an oral rehearsal. They get a chance to practice what's going to come out of their mouth in a safe place before it comes out to the whole class. And the main reason I love this one, prepping the speaker, is normally if you pull a stick and number 3 gets called, what does 1, 2, and 4 do? They point and laugh at number 3, right? They're like, haha, you got picked. Right. But when I say your job is to help them, do you see now I've totally transformed the culture of the classroom just by saying that, because now they feel like a team and they feel a little responsible to make sure that their number 3 has something great to say. So we've shifted from a I feel singled out sort of situation to a I work within a team and I'm their representative, all by just saying, I'll give you a few seconds to check in with your partner because A's, you're going to be doing the talking. I want you to feel ready. So that's a great example of a small move that takes about 10 seconds out of my mouth, and it can really absolutely transform the way talk goes in your classroom.
Right. I'm just thinking about how that small little move, really, you're prepping the speaker, how we can set them to be so that they're successful the rest of that time. So that they're successful, they're going to speak in full sentences. They now have a collaborative experience with others. It just makes a lot of sense. Do you want to share another one for?
Oh, thank you. Another one related to helping kids to talk more is uh, if you're the sort of student who might lack confidence in your response, you're not real sure, right? So instead of calling on you and saying, Ton, can you share what you think the answer is? I'm going to change it to the small move is to allow for anyone's answer. So it's going to sound like this. Ton, I'm going to have you share. If you'd like to share yours, you can, or you can share any idea you heard in your conversation, right? So this idea that you don't have to take ownership over the thinking. You're just the sharer of the thinking. And for me, even as an adult in meetings and things like that, I do that a lot. I don't love my answer, but I love what my partner said. And I'll say, if I get called on to share or to talk in a staff meeting or whatever, I'll say, well, you know what we were talking about our table. What Kathy mentioned was, right, it's a safety mechanism, right? And I think bringing that into the classroom really creates, again, a culture where we're minimizing the fear level or the negative response to kind of this idea of representing or sharing out what our partner said. So, and speaking of small moves, and those work great together, right? So you guys can talk at your tables for about a minute, and then when the minute is up, I'm going to say, okay, you guys, number 3s. I'm going to give you a few seconds. You guys need to prepare number 3, make sure they're really ready. And 3s, remember, you don't have to share your idea. You can share anybody's idea that you heard. So you see how quick that is? And that's actually 2 moves, not just 1, but it's going to dramatically increase kids' willingness to actively participate in conversation.
It goes back to that concept of habit stacking, right? And so
yes,
you're adding habits for students, and that becomes even more exponentially powerful. I'm also feeling so validated because that's exactly the same practice I do in my class. I'll call on a student and I'll say, Arcad, what did Leo say? Right. And so cause students know when I call on them, I'm never going to ask them for what their idea is. I always ask for their partner. So they're actually listening more intently.
Awesome. And I would agree with that. This idea of anyone's answers does also directly address the listening domain, which is sometimes undervalued as far as a teacher's area of focus, right? Like we think about what we're going to say, we think about what they're going to say, but we're not really thinking about how well are they listening. And just the act of saying you can share anybody's idea promotes active listening. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
And also it goes back to Krashen's theory of affective filter. When
Yes.
students feeling stressed in school or in class, they're not going to participate. All their cognitive functioning skills are going to be to devoted to helping them feel safe, to helping them avoid conflict, to helping them avoid participation because they want to feel safe. And so that helps students participate more. And when they participate more, they learn more.
Absolutely.
Let's move to chapter 3. Um, we learn about teacher habits that get kids to think more. Can you share just two?
Sure. So the first one I've already alluded to earlier today in our conversation, which is it comes from Talk Read Talk Write, and it is my all-time favorite strategy connected to reading, which is just simply saying your purpose for reading is. So setting a purpose. And over time, that's going to get passed over to students where they're going to start self-selecting their own purposes, right? That's where the end goal of where we want to go. But how many times have you done this? I did it all the time. So in my small group, right? I say, okay, so I want everybody to finish to the bottom of page 42, and then we're going to talk about it. And they read. And when we get to the bottom of page 42, I say, okay, so boys and girls, did anybody notice any figurative language? And what do your kids do? They go like, what? And then they start rereading 42 again, right? Where all I have to do is think, what am I going to ask them afterward? Because teachers ask questions after reading all the time, and we're just going to put that at the front, right? So guys, I'm going to go walk around and check on everybody at their workstations. I want you to read page 42 to the bottom, and you're looking for one piece of figurative language. So a simile, a metaphor, look at our chart if you need it. I'll be back in just a minute. That's it. It's so easy. The challenge is automating that, right? The challenge is, how can I make sure that I'm going to set a purpose for kids habitually? And this is one where we can enlist our kids to do that. So that's the first one. The next one, will you be willing to role play with me a little bit? And this
Absolutely.
might not go over well, but we're going to give it a shot.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. And I know that I did not give these to you ahead of time, so you might need a second or two of processing time. Feel free to take it. Okay. So Tan, can you tell me what one of your favorite foods is and why?
One of my favorite food is pad thai. I love it because it's both fresh and filling, sweet and tangy.
Oh, all right. Excellent. So I'm going to ask the same question a little bit different way. Okay. And you don't have to change your answer. Just answer it from the way I'm asking it. So Tan, I want you to think about what your favorite food is. And I want to see if you can tell me 5 things you like about it.
Didn't I already do that with the listing?
Well, what you said was that it is, you gave me 4. You said something about you. So here's where I'm going with it. So it didn't land as well because with adults, we generally speak in a more complete way. Right. If I ask a kid, what's your favorite food and why? He might say something like enchiladas because they're yummy, right? The deal is I can ask the question in a different way and get better thinking by just picking a number. So in my example with you, my number that I picked was 5. So I say, can you tell me what your favorite food is? And I'd like for you to think and tell me about 5 reasons why you like it. So then what does that kid have to do? He's going to say enchiladas because they're yummy. And what happens in his brain now? He's extending his thinking, right? So the strategy, the small move is called pick a number. And what that is the teacher in any situation, a writing, a talking, a thinking, whatever we're asking kids to do, instead of just asking the question, we're also going to ask the question and quantify the sort of responses we're looking for. Because in general, in my experience, at least, kids do the bare minimum. And I don't know why that is, but they generally don't answer like Tan answers, right? They don't say, I love pad thai because, and we have this beautiful flourishing paragraph, right? That's not how kids are, right? So, but when we say, here's my question, see if you can come up with 2 alternatives. Here's my question, try to brainstorm at least 3 different ways to answer it. What we're training them to do is think more deeply about a topic by giving them a number. That's it.
Right. That quantification makes them think deeply, like, okay, this is one, and that's another. And I think I'm a bad role model student because I am one of those people who like to talk, so it didn't work. But with students, I can see this working with my students. I can see them, I can see asking a Q triple essay question, and setting a number for that question, right? And then students actually having to think about it and looking for ways to produce that number answered.
Absolutely.
Is this the chapter with also fishing in it?
Stop fishing. Yes.
I think that's like my biggest thing I need to work on. Because when I record myself teaching, I'm like, you're doing that thing again.
Yes. So for if you're unfamiliar with that, the phrase that I use for I call it the strategy is called stop fishing, which is this, or another way that I frame this one is it's called questioning the air. We say stuff like this: who can tell me what they remember about main idea? Right. Or I say, so what's one thing you remember about fractions from last year? And I'm fishing. I'm just going to throw the line out and hope any kid takes bait. The problem with fishing, throwing the line out and hoping a kid takes bait, is the same three kids take bait every day, all year. Right. So the idea is to put in some sort of system to minimize or eliminate that, which we're all familiar with random selection techniques like popsicle sticks or wheel of names or table number and color number. There's lots of ways to do it. But the idea is that when we pose a question to the class, it's my belief that it's valuable for every kid to think about it and for every kid to have an opportunity to answer it. So I've got to ask it in a way that nobody knows who's going to answer the question. And when that's the case, then we've got increased engagement.
Yeah, I think fishing is you when you know that that's happening, you can really train yourself to be like, wait, let's not do that. And so instead of fishing, what can we do instead?
So I need help with all this stuff. Like I'm as imperfect as it gets. Okay. So I was the who can tell me blank teacher. I did that all the time. And I just got my cup with popsicle sticks that had every kid's name in it. I know it's so old school, but it still works. And you know what I did? I gave that cup to my shouter outer kid, my ooher kid, right? Carol Salva calls them professional answerers. I love it, right? So I killed two birds with one stone. I gave that kid the cup. Let's just call that kid Maria, right? And I said, Maria, every time I ask a question, whenever you hear me say, who can tell me, just pull a stick out and call a name. So what did I do there? I've got a system, but I've also enlisted help in holding myself accountable for the system. And kids, when you give them a job, whatever the job chart says, they are doing that job. That is their job. The nice benefit of picking the shouter outer to pull the stick is she stops shouting out the answer. She starts shouting out the name. So I've also minimized another thing that goes on in the classroom that kind of can get in the way of all kids learning. So that would be my quick answer for that. But there's lots of ways to do that.
Oh, there are so many. There's so much intentionality in all the strategies that you're sharing. Like you could see, like we do this for that purpose. Right? It's so great.
That makes me very happy because I just told you that the kind of teacher I want to be is intentional. So it really makes me feel awesome to hear evidence of the votes that I'm making for myself in the way you're hearing what I'm saying. So that's really great.
Let's move to chapter 4, your last chapter. Let's focus. How can we focus on getting kids to achieve more?
So before I get into this one, I just want to revisit that word achieve because I think everybody can define that differently. The way I'm defining it in the book is really about how well are kids able to acquire the content of the subject that you're teaching them. So are they learning the math? Are they learning the whatever they're learning in band? Are they learning whatever they're learning in manufacturing? Are they learning the science, right? And interestingly, when we get into content, normally what you get is a whole lot of content strategies, right? This is the best way to teach addition. And I'm going to offer you none of that in this chapter. So really, this chapter is organized around what are all the other factors at play when we're asking kids to learn content. So one example is, what do we know about how kids or anybody remembers things? And can we teach the math or the manufacturing or the science in a way that's memorable? So it's very funny that when you sent me the email to prepare for this, you asked me to think about stories, right? Because you know why? There is so much science that says a narrative structure, a story of any kind, what it does is it activates the parts of our brain that create memories, that store memories, and that are able to retrieve memories. Well, what do we want in teaching and learning? We want kids to remember it, hold it, and be able to pull it back up again, right? So one of the small moves in Achieve More is tell a story. And what I mean by that is any piece of content that I'm delivering, if I can attach some sort of a narrative structure to it, it does not have to be elaborate, right? Then we're going to remember it. So for example, when I talked earlier today, you might remember this as the messy turn-in tray story that I told, right? But you have an anchor for this idea of how did I get to be so good at formative assessment? You're not going to remember that part. You're going to remember what was she saying about, oh, the messy desk, and then she had to straighten it, and then she started grading. You remember that content. So to me, that is a really powerful one that some teachers and some people in general are just natural storytellers. It's how they converse, how they're built. And usually those are the people that everyone else has hovered around at the party, right? Because they're telling stories. So I just would encourage, if you're not that way, if you're going, man, I don't, this is a place we can be a little more intentional. I can look at next week's lesson plans and I can pick one spot and say, what's a story that I can tell? And it doesn't have to be your story. Just make one up. I do that all the time. So that's one. And then I'll let you share about that. So, and because I know you already know that one because you told me to do it. And I was like, it's already in the book.
Yes, yes. And I think it's those moments when you teach class, you notice those kids, those moments when their eyes glaze over. But you also notice moments when they're hanging on every single word. And those moments are always when I'm telling stories about my weekend. Or when I'm telling stories about something that's connected to my life, that's connected to the content. They're like listening. It's the kid who like doesn't usually listen at all. But they'll listen when I talk about my prom. Or they'll listen about when I talk about I went shopping this weekend and it was hard to find this and that. Right? Or like it makes it personal. And so those stories are super helpful.
Yes. I would agree with that. And I think the other thing about telling stories is it goes back to, your idea of it being personal. We are doing far more than teaching content to kids. You know what I mean? We are growing human beings and we are the model of that for them. And so anything where they can see me as a more complete person, not just their math teacher, right? That's only going to help build the relationship between us. And we all know the research behind that too, right? That when kids feel loved and safe and in a relationship with a caring adult, of course, they're going to acquire more content knowledge.
What's another strategy you were about to talk about?
Oh, this one's super easy. It's called Smile. And you've been practicing it all day long. So here's the thing. And this is where I had a little bit of anxiety in the production of this book, because what I don't want it to seem like is that I think every one of us knows that smiling is a great thing. And I think all of us do that. But when we smile the most? From 8 to 9:05 every morning. How many of you are smiling at 2:00 this Friday in May, right? We are worn out and bone tired. So this is a good example. So smile. Another one is using a timer. There's some ideas in the book that I guarantee you are not new to anybody. It's not that I'm offering you an earth-shattering small move, but what I want to do is bring to the forefront something that we all know to do, which is smile. When our countenance looks positive, learning occurs more than when it doesn't. I share a story in the book that my kids call it my driving face. Often in the car, my kids say, is everything okay, Mom? And I'm like, yeah. In my mind, I'm like, happy. It's a good day. We're just going to run errands. I'm not upset about anything. And they're like, could have fooled me, because in the rearview mirror, they see my face is kind of crumpled up. Well, the issue is my face is like that because I'm kind of a nervous driver. I worry about all the things that are around me. So while my mood is very positive, my immediate focus is my face is showing that my face is not matching my mood. And I think that happens a lot in teaching, which is we're thinking like, man, the copy machine broke down and I've got to get back to my class. So you get to your class, but you needed, 2 more packets run and you didn't have time to do it. That's what your face is showing, but you're not mad at your kids. You're happy. You're glad to see them. Everything's great. Right. So this one is a good example of something that we want intentionality behind. So we know to smile and we do it when it's easy, but how can I become so intentional with smiling that it is hard not to do it, even in times of stress, even in times of distraction? And that's where we would circle back to chapter 1 to think about what are the skills for habit formation. And another one besides accountability is a visual, which this ties right into with the work we do with our multilingual learners. So my visual for smiling is in every class period, early in my career, I would pick one or two of my jolliest kids, the kids who love me and love my class and are happy to be there because they're already smiling. So every time I made eye contact with them, that was my cue to smile myself. That was it. Okay. Now, what happened is that evolved over time because I told you I'm kind of competitive, right? So what it turned into is I would pick my most disgruntled students, and they were my visual. Every time I looked at Joaquin, who comes in rumpled face and proceeds to try to fall asleep in my class every day, that's what he does, right? So I'm like, in my head, like Jedi mind trick, right? Like I'm trying to will him to smile. And the only way I can start doing that is by me smiling at him. Right. So he became my visual, and I had a Joaquin in every class period. And every time I see him, it's my cue to smile. It's my cue to smile. One other little sidebar about smiling is fake smiles have the same effect. So even if you're not feeling it, right, you really aren't happy, you're in a bad mood. Yeah, I got in a fight with my husband on my way to work, or a kid just said something that was totally rude and I'm angry and I'm writing up an office referral, right? So let's just practice. I know everybody can't see us, but like get a really mean face. You're in a bad mood. You're really mad. And now fake smile. Like, I can't believe this lady is making me smile. The fake smiling actually releases the same endorphins in your brain as real smiling does. So fake it, even if you're not feeling it, is my feedback on smiling.
And the best part is students can still tell that you're smiling even if you're wearing a mask.
Yes. Oh, yes. It's the eye smile.
Eyes. It's an eye
Yes.
smile. Yes. And the way I automatize my smile with my students is I stand by the door twice a period, at the beginning and the end, just like I'm a flight attendant. Like my passion, this is a secret confession. I wanted to be a flight attendant before I was a teacher, and I was like, wait, let me try teaching. And so I get to live my flight attendant self every single day when I stand at the door. I greet students and I say their names in a way that they can tell that I'm smiling their names, not just
Yes.
hi Nancy. It's like hi Nancy.
Yes.
Can't ever tell. And when they leave, I do the same thing.
I love it. I love it. And what you just did was you modeled also. So the physical movement to the door is your cue. So that would fall in, and when you think about how do we build habits, that would fall under the creating a visual cue. And your visual cue is, I'm going to go move to this door. Right. So amazing. I love it.
Oh, Nancy. Well, whenever you're done with being a consultant, education consultant, you can be a personal coach and a life coach. You're already
Oh,
my life coach. You can also be like a motivational speaker.
oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It's easy to be motivated about things that I have passion around. And teachers are like the best people on earth, and they are so undervalued right now and so overwhelmed right now. And I'm just excited to bring something to light that hopefully feels like I already do all this stuff, or yes, I can do that tiny thing, right? Where they leave feeling just, this is doable. I can take action to vote for myself to be even better, even when I'm overwhelmed and tired and exhausted and undervalued.
Whew. Can I end with this? The traffic light teaching. In terms of habits, habit formation, what would you ask teachers to stop doing in terms of habits, keep doing in terms of habits, and start doing in terms of habits? So it's like red, yellow, green light.
I would say that the stop doing the green light is this self-judgment that we all do. So, for example, when we talk about building habits, James Clear talks about, he gives an analogy of the rose bush. When I'm trying to do something new, we expect ourselves to be this beautiful rose bush. But how do rose bushes start? They're a seed. And then what do they become? A seedling. And nobody who's growing a rose bush ever looks at that seed and goes, I can't believe you're not a rose bush yet. Nobody does that. We know that there is a progression, right? But what we do to ourselves all the time, especially in our teaching career, is I can't believe I'm not a rose bush yet, right? We like, that's too hard. That's too much. And so I'm not even going to bother with it. Like, live as a seed and be great as a seed. So I would, or be great as a seedling, that know that we're all on a journey, and we're not doing ourselves any favor by beating ourselves up, right? The best thing so I guess tied to that. So I would say, stop the kind of negative self-talk that we have, that I have, I know I have to do this on a daily basis to this day, is to like focus, like, it's okay if you're a seed in this category, right? And then what I would do more of is, as much as possible, whatever the moves are, try to have that positive lens, whether that's gratitude or that's improvement. That's a good one for me. Is what I try to do in all my classes is kind of see where's there a growth point. And most of the time it's not me as a teacher who has a growth point, right? It's one of my kids. But if we can kind of enter every class period every day looking for that, we're going to automatically bring more intention to our teaching. And what's the yellow? The yellow is like something you sort of do and keep doing.
Yeah. Keep doing
So I think a really good one connected to that is, most of us are excellent at building excellent relationships with some of our kids, right? We've got the kids that are easy to connect to. We connect quickly for whatever reason. We have chemistry. So my recommendation on that one would be, get in the habit of growing another kid or growing another relationship, right? So we're going to feel really good about the ones we have. And I'm going to think about who's my next target, right? Who's my next target of love and care and relationship. And that might be another way to kind of move yourself forward in a space where you're already doing a lot of really great things.
And start doing.
Well, see, this is tricky because that implies that we're doing something not right now. And I'm unwilling to live there. So I think what you can start doing, if you're not already, is thinking about habit formation, which is the things you're already doing well. How can we automate them? How can we make them where the definition of a habit is a tendency that is hard not to do. So it's something that requires no brain power. And so how can I take something that I'm doing really well and make it so habitual that I've freed up brain space to do other hard things? Right? You know how you drive and you get somewhere and you don't remember driving there. It's a habit. So what if there were some things we were doing in our classroom that you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe the bell rang. And all those things were amazing and highly effective. So I guess start thinking about habit formation.
You know, so we're ending the podcast now, but every morning I do a little meditation. I have a little 9-minute timer meditation, and it's called Insight Timer, and it has a little quote that came up this morning, and the quotes rotate. And this one was what Aristotle said. He said, what we practice most, we become. Excellence is a habit. And
yes,
so you are helping us continue to be excellent. And you said earlier that vote for how you want to appear and just show up. You are helping us show up through this book. Already you helped us show up meaningfully for our students with Talk We Talk, right? But now you're showing up, helping us show up in a different way. I know that I will now share 3 books. And maybe this first one, I wish that I can go back to that first year Tan in 2007 and say, here you go. All you need is this book. Read Small Little Habits, Small Moves. So Nancy Motley, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Tan. I'm grateful for the time and this conversation. I hope everybody can enjoy, leave it feeling uplifted. And I love that Small Moves is the book for the first year teacher for sure. I mean, it's going to help everybody, but this is the way in. So thank you for letting me share a few little nuggets about it on the podcast. And I look forward to working with you soon.